Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. This is, of course, where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Peter Ndoro and this is what's coming up on the show today. We'll be taking a look at the State of Journalism 2019 following a report that was released this past week. We'll also be unpacking the media storm surrounding the Economic Freedom Fighters elective conference, which started on Friday and is set to conclude on Monday. We also have our regular features, including a look back in history a little later on in the show. And don't forget, you can engage with us on social media using the hashtag SABC Media Monitor. We'd love to hear from you. But before we unpack all of these stories, let's first take a look at what's on the front pages of your Sunday newspapers today. Let's start with the Sunday Times, and their front page story alleges that the ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule has come out in defense of former President Jacob Zuma's legacy, claiming that he's not solely responsible for the collapse of state-owned companies. This apparently as President Ramaphosa was roasted by the ANC's NEC over the SAA rescue operation. The City Press, well, that's leading with a story about an engineering firm that has been ordered by the courts to pay back all the profits it made from a 200 million rand worth of corrupt contracts from Transnet. Amongst other things, one Transnet employee, Herbert Msagala, was given funds to make a deposit on a luxury house, and he also received 5 scooters from IGS Consulting Engineers boss Sipho Sitole. The Sunday Independent, their headline story is about former Eskom CEO Brian Molefe, who says that he's willing to help end the economy crippling load shedding if requested and if kangaroo courts are set aside. He told the paper that government should run the power utility by the book and focus on planned maintenance and dump what he's termed ideological, politically correct decisions on the inclusion of renewable energy and independent power producers. The Sunday Tribune is reporting a story about Durban businessman Arnold Singh, who is a celebrity chauffeur for a time, and he had his multi-million rand claim rejected by his insurer Discovery. He had said that he could no longer work because of his arthritis, but the insurer disputed this and also allegedly recorded Singh secretly via video and photographs, taking note of his movements after the claim was lodged. The Weekend Argus on Sunday is leading with the story of a former teacher, Fiona Fiotti, and how the school, Bishops, has now reported her to the police for her alleged misconduct with at least 5 pupils since 2013. This was after the school was advised about certain reporting obligations in terms of the SA Council of Educators, Code of Professional Ethics, as well as the Sexual Offences Act. Right, now the Sunday World is reporting about a war and a battle between the widows of the late International Pentecost Holiness Church leader Clayton Modise over the division of the clergyman's a whopping estate of 164 million rand. So that's a look at the papers, but let's take a look at what's trending. In fact, let's introduce our guests now. In fact, what we're looking at is what's trending on social media, of course. And this is what's happening on social media right now. So that's the top 5 trends at the moment. UFC normally is trending at this time. Sunday Motivation, no surprise. But I guess with what's happening at the EFF conference, Dr. Ndlozi finds himself at number 3, and this is partly because people are surprised that he is not in the top 6, and he continues to have this title Ice Boy that keeps following him around. So people have been tweeting, sharing their thoughts and their messages. As I said, a lot of them surprised that He hasn't been included in the top 6. There was a switch in leadership. The top 2, as in the CIC and the deputy, were the only ones that were retained, and the new faces in the other 4 positions of the top 6. But Dr. Ndlozi, some people thought he might have risen a little bit in the ranks there, but he continues as the national spokesperson. All right, so there's so much to get through on the show this morning, and helping us make sense of these stories are my guest editors. And we have today SABC foreign editor Sophie Mkwena and the vice president of the Public Relations Institute of Southern Africa, as well as CEO at Ditsecho Media, Tebogo Ditsecho. To both of you, a very good morning. Welcome. Thank you.
Morning, Peter.
All right, so let's start the show. Now, the Economic Freedom Fighters, the EFF's second elective conference, kicked off this past Friday. An estimated 4,000 delegates have gathered at the National Recreation Centre, NASREC, south of Johannesburg, to discuss policy issues and, most importantly, elect its new leadership. But one issue that has also dominated conversation was the party banning a number of media houses from covering the conference.
The battle lines are drawn between the EFF and the media. The Daily Maverick, Scorpio, Amabungane, Rapport and the Caxton Group were denied accreditation. It prompted news channel ENCA to suspend its coverage of the conference. In a statement, Daily Maverick editor-in-chief Branko Brick says the EFF's action is unconstitutional and will be tested in court in the new year. Brick says the ban on media brands exposes the party's totalitarian bent. SANEF too has called it unconstitutional.
The actions of the EFF were intended to intimidate the media, and also they are unconstitutional. And actually also the EFF missed an opportunity where they had where they could project themselves as a mature party that is tolerant to criticism.
Amid the controversy, the EFF insists media freedom is paramount in the party. Leader Malema, however, says he will meet with SANEF.
SANEF will meet them. If they still want to meet us, we said we'll meet them after elections. We met SANEF, by the way, during ANN 7. They came to us, we had a meeting with them. We told them our difficulties. They agreed in corners, or hey, we can see this thing is not going to work. So we'll meet them again.
The EFF conference ends on Monday. Abongile Tumago, SABC News, Johannesburg.
All right, so let's explore this. And some people were shocked by what happened, certain media houses being banned, and ENCA choosing not to cover the conference as a result of the others being banned. Let's unpack that. Your thoughts, let me start with you, Sophie. I mean, it's an interesting turn of events, but some people may not have been surprised.
Well, it's not surprising, but the reality is I don't support any banning of any media or individual journalist. I believe that when there are tensions and disagreement, there should be discussion to try and find out and resolve the standoff. And this is what I have been saying with my colleagues in SANEF, that we really have to push to ensure that we deal with this matter once and for all. As you heard yesterday at the media briefing, I asked the question, when are they meeting the SANEF as agreed, and as they have promised that after election that will happen. And I think that's the only way. But also I think as media we must also do thorough introspection in terms of how do we ensure that as we do our work, we find a way where we really do our work without fear or favor, or perhaps being too personal on certain issues, or stoop low to an extent that perhaps our work is questioned. Therefore, I think this is the matter that can still be resolved. And secondly, I think in life, if you don't have a principle, if you are not principled, it will catch up with you. Because at some point in time, you will take a particular decision, and later on you'd want to take a particular decision depending on who is involved. When you look at what's happening unfortunately, we live in a time where the social media archives are very dangerous. People are starting to dig in terms of how we as the media handled similar standoff or scenarios. And now we are found wanting. Even particularly young journalists themselves that I interacted with yesterday, they were puzzled because they felt that at some point in time there was a different position taken when a similar incident happened with what we now know as ANN7. You may have questioned the ownership of ANN7, but at that time you had very young upcoming journalists who were working in that company who needed our support at all costs. Today those young journalists are now working in different media houses and they are doing very well, but they still have this anger in themselves. I've interacted. Yes, how we treated them when they found themselves in that situation. So I can imagine one of the journalists working for one of the media houses that's being banned or caught in the storm said when ENCA announced that they will be pulling out in solidarity, said not on my name, because he understood that as media we cannot continue with the ban ourselves, do the same wrong that we are trying to address. And therefore I think we must go back to the drawing boards as the media, look at what has happened for quite a number of years now in terms of how we have conducted ourselves. Even in defense of journalists, we take sides. There are those journalists who come out and will defend them, but
we'll
others
that aspect a little bit more later, because that talks to trust as well in journalists and the state of the media. So we'll explore that thought again a little bit later on. But Tebogo, your thoughts? I mean, you're a PR guy as well. So is there any reputational damage to the party doing this, or it doesn't matter? Those that support EFF are going to continue, and those that didn't like them, they're not worried either.
Well, the reputational damage can be assessed through the principle. The principle of trying to ensure that certain media houses do not cover your conference. I don't think that it's the correct decision to make. I do understand that if you'd like to protest bias within the media, you would do it in different ways. And perhaps they thought that they've tried different angles and it hasn't worked. But censorship is never going to be the answer to dealing with differences that you have with journalists and the manner in which you are covered. So we can never support a move for you to censor journalists and not allow them into your event. I'll give you a simple example, a practical one. There is a media house that I didn't agree with. In an angle, they were approaching a story. But I engaged them intellectually. And then I invited them to come and see one of our projects for themselves. And that is the kind of approach you need to have, where you increase your transparency as opposed to saying, no, we don't want you here anymore. I do understand that the Economic Freedom Fighters is following a very radical and revolutionary approach, using various examples that you'll find in Latin America, Venezuela, and so on and so forth. But the freedom of expression is very sacrosanct. And the move by ENCA to not cover the conference is addressing censorship through censorship. It's never going to work.
My problem is when the EFF, the very same EFF, let's go back to the archives, they are there. Just Google EFF ANN7. When that happened to junior journalists, what did we do? I'm happy because SANEF did take a stand. They did approach the EFF, as Malema has indicated, and they couldn't agree. And they agreed to disagree. But the reality is, we must be consistent for us to end the respect.
Situations.
Yes, it shouldn't be because it's Peter. I don't like Peter. I'm going to keep quiet when Peter as a journalist is attacked. Instead, I'm going to be... I want to make one example. In 2007 at Polokwane, when senior politicians, some of them today are ministers, went to the working area of the SABC because they didn't agree with SABC, perhaps, maybe justifiably so, to go and intimidate SABC staff at the working area, almost like coming inside the SABC, saying, we are going down there, the announcement is going to be made, President Zuma is going to win this conference, when we come back, we are going to deal with you.
Wow.
The then head of news, Nuki, had to say, some journalists, particularly women, go. The situation is now volatile. Those people today, they are ministers. Some and they were followed behind by journalists who are doing a story rather than saying what's happening, you know, laughing. So I'm saying we must be consistent. You can ask Snuki Zigalala.
All right, we'll hear again a bit more about our own behavior and how that affects the public perception of journalists. But let's listen to the Commander-in-Chief once again as he talked about this issue, particularly whilst he was delivering his political report.
Chairs, media. Media freedom is guaranteed for genuine media, but those who proclaimed agenda, whose proclaimed agenda is to destroy the EFF, must be isolated.
All right, so again, he's taking a hard line that he feels that if you're after our party, you've got to be isolated.
Look, it's also a role of the public relations industry when you're working with clients to enlighten them about they must respect freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and the freedom of the press. And this is something that you have to, it's a management function, public relations. You don't just go and communicate whatever they tell you to communicate. You need to also educate your clients. And I think it would also be the role of the people who are working within communications in the EFF to sit the CIC down and say, no, this is not the way to go. You don't have to isolate the media. Engage the media. Even if the agenda is never going to be the way that you want it or on your side, you have to continuously engage them and then find more creative ways in which you can overcome this. We've got social media now as a platform where if you feel that a story is not going the way that you want it to go or it's not accurate, you can go and clarify on social media. So there's no monopoly over the sharing of information currently. And I think we should utilize the various tools to say this is not the real story. But another thing that works is the Press Council. That organization works really well in holding journalists accountable. And if you feel that they didn't give you a chance to respond or they were biased, the press code in South Africa is very good. And I think that they can use those avenues too.
All right, so they must be isolated. And I'm just wondering, we were talking about journalists introspecting, and I just wonder, could there be consequences for the EFF taking a stance such as this?
I can't see consequences. I mean, EFF, every political party has got a particular brand and approach and constituency. So when you look at the EFF constituency, majority is young people who are really, really frustrated with the establishment. It's the working class who just want a better life. They don't care about your censorship and what. It is for that reason that it might to certain people, but not to the entire support base of the EFF, because this is who they are. It's like looking at the ANC. ANC has got a very loyal particular constituency. From time to time, it will lose support from certain quarters because of certain things that have happened in the party. But the reality is they have a solid constituency. That is why when you look between 1999 to 2007, ANC was doing well in most provinces because the focus of the party was on its constituency to strengthen the base. That's what DA is trying to do now. They know their base is a particular constituency. So you have to first make sure you strengthen and you have full support of your constituency before going out and getting others. So that's what they are trying to do. They have assessed their constituency. They know they are covered with the constituency, but they would still want to extend their support base. So it will take time for them to understand. One thing that I engaged one of the senior EFF members, top leadership in the Central Command, talking about some issues that I don't understand. And that person said to me, you see the problem with EFF, you South Africans, you expect too much from us. We don't have case studies, we don't have experiences, so we try this and that and that and that. And that is why even our people, our members, our leaders, sometimes they will commit mistakes because there's no case study and they are learning. Now, in that very same process, when we're trying to build a party, we are trying to ensure that we control or centralize rather than decentralize. In other words, democratic centralism. And as we implement this democratic centralism, it also affects us in a sense that people are not given a chance to learn and to be exposed. Therefore, I think it is a small party, a young party that's still learning and growing, and we will continuously have these problems with the EFF until such time perhaps it is mature enough. When you look at the ANC at 100 and something, but ANC is still making mistakes.
Yeah. All right. Interestingly, and this kind of speaks to some of the things that you said, the Commander-in-Chief of the EFF also talked about the kind of journalists that South Africa should have. And this is what he said.
We need seasoned journalists who will not seek to impress their white masters. Let me give you an example. Yesterday in a press conference, a stupid journalist asked a stupid question. He says to the TG, how much did you spend here? And how much did the liquidated VBS, this is not in my report, how much did the liquidated VBS pay? Just listen to a foolish question. Liquidated and payments. How can a liquidated company pay?
Okay, so he says the type of journalist that's out there, I mean, he's kind of couched it in this whole white monopoly capital story, but is there some thread of truth in the quality of journalists that appear at these conferences and tell stories?
Well, indeed, the juniorization of the newsroom has its own negative impact. But again, for me, as a leader, you don't use a particular language when you are in public place and the cameras are there and the whole world is watching you. You can raise your concern that I don't agree with this one's report based on this and that, like he's arguing that when you talk about liquidation and the next thing you say someone has got money to pay. Perhaps Samgelo was talking about, because previously there were reports that they received money from VBS. It's not now. I mean, liquidation happened after. Maybe he was referring to the earlier activity, which EFF has since denied, to say you can go through our books, there's nothing. And I think it may be there. You can argue that maybe Samgelo had a point, but him also, you can argue that at times as journalists we must really do our research when we link issues. But for me, I would prefer when you engage me, use a particular language. And some of us, when these things happen, we do speak to newsmakers behind the scenes. That, but do you think that kind of response was and then a person, you differ to disagree, but you have raised your issue to say, but for me the language was not right. You may have a point, but I think as we do that, we must, the respect must still be there, because tomorrow you'll be again speaking to this very same person and you'd want him to respect you as well. So, and people were saying, why is Samgelo laughing? What do? You have to, I mean, he knew.
But I want to put that to you as well, because I first saw this when the BBC journalist was thrown out of Luthuli House. That the response of the journalists was to laugh at the situation. And you were talking about consistency. Did that disturb you, that journalists generally laughed at that when one of their own was being blasted in that way?
I think, I'm not sure, because the way he was engaging was quite hilarious. It was quite humorous.
Yeah.
But I think the way in which he should be engaging them is more technically. And that's why he should bring matters to the press council and start to win victories there. And that could, I mean,
But
when the
do
press
you
council...
call someone a domkop?
No, you don't. You don't. And there's similarities in how the current president of the US addresses the media. In every single address, he greets the media, he says hi to the media and hi to the fake news. And I think that is something that is happening in the world. I don't think it's the way we should go. And I don't think we should use the US as an example. South Africa is rated higher than the US when it comes to media freedom in the Press Freedom Index. And so we are a beacon of hope for the world, for Africa, and I think we should be setting a better example.
All right.
I think it goes back also to principle. I mean, you just cited an example. I was there at Luthuli House when that happened. And even the activists, what did they do in the media cycle about that? And now you find a similar situation. Therefore, I'm saying, if we are not consistent, these things will come back and haunt us. And it's said because it's a particular time and era and individual doing this thing, now we feel that it's wrong. I think we must ensure that moving forward as journalists, we are very, very consistent. Because you're talking about EFF press conference and address where these things happen. All political parties, they do it. 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 You must check your archives and your, you know, the archives. It has happened on many platforms. Many platforms, different political parties doing this thing. And we kept quiet because at that time, perhaps it wasn't, we didn't feel strong about it because it was not directed at us or at an individual that we would want to protect. But it's these people, they are used to it.
Yeah.
I mean, Malema was in the ANC Youth League at the height of tension during the transition 2007 to, you know, the new... These things were happening, and around him you had senior ANC leaders who, some of them today are occupying very high position, and they were laughing. And today people are saying people mustn't laugh. I'm just saying consistency and
that seems to be
principled in life. Even if it means you are the single voice, stand up for what you believe in, and it must be based on principle, because at a long time you'll be vindicated.
All right, you know what, we're going to have to take a break, and when we come back we'll continue, and I suppose some of these threads will come through, because we want to look at the state of journalism and the trust that the public has in our media. All of that's still to come. Stay with us.
Messes happen every day. You can clean it the hard way or the easy way with the Genesis cordless sweeper with tri-brush technology. It effortlessly sweeps almost anything from your carpets, cleans any dry mess from hard floors. It even picks up broken glass. With the edge cleaning brush, it cleans right into the corners. When you're done, it empties with a touch of a button. Genesis is rechargeable and ready whenever or wherever messes happen. Get your Genesis cordless sweeper from your nearest Verimark outlet today.
In my time, I've truly seen it all firsthand. Angizwanga, ngizibonele ngalawa amehlo. Going through my photographs and reflecting on my memory box really brings back many life experiences that are bittersweet and humbling. In this, my homeland, I've entertained tourists and offshore traders. I've evolved from dealing with the battering system to trading foreign exchange. I've traveled to the ends of the world and tasted a diversity of culinary palates. To outsiders, I have lived alongside wild animals, tamed some, and collected livestock as wealth. So my memory box is overflowing. And don't get me wrong, I'm not bragging, but in fact, I'm breaking and hurting deep down inside of this heart of mine. Why? What for? I hear you ask yourself, my fellow Africans, friends and family. The images I have of me are those of the point of view of my onlooker, not those of myself, the subject at hand. I'm choking and suffocating at the chalice those anthropologists and filmmakers tie around me as some sort of grand name tag. Stories have been made and told of me, not of my own words. Films and graphic images have entertained millions of audiences at my expense.
Our job as the SA Today team doesn't simply start when the cameras start to roll. We also work tirelessly behind the scenes to keep you up to date with stories of the day.
What have you established as an organization, or rather as an association, regarding this WhatsApp group Stokvel?
If you look at the WhatsApp Stokvels, people join irrespective of whether they know each other or not. So the person joining is faceless. The one recruiting is also faceless. It's a disaster.
Watch SA Today every day from 3 p.m.
Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, this past week, public relations earned media software company Sission released its 2019 State of the Media report, which endeavours to shed some light on public trust in the media and how journalists choose which stories to write about. Now, the past 12 months have been challenging for the media industry, and according to the report, journalists are contending with fewer resources and a host of challenges, including receiving more and more PR pitches than ever. 16% of journalists said that they want PR professionals to stop spamming them. All right, let's talk state of the media, and I'm going to start with PR because that's what you do. And there is pitching stories, but sometimes, and a lot of the times I find, it's PR that you're trying to do. And journalists are exhausted by this.
Yeah, I think the relationship between the PR industry and journalists has actually improved from 2017 to 2018. The reason for this is because the PR professionals provide you with a primary resource because they have the direct communication with the client. Another thing is PR companies have resources sometimes that journalists don't have. So there will be events that would need to be attended, big launches that happen, and then you need those images, high resolution images, if maybe a bank is being launched, and you need the specific quote from the specific person in the organization, and then you can get that from a PR professional. So this relationship, sometimes a journalist would get irritated if it seems like advertising, and there's a big difference between advertising and public relations. Public relations has to be interesting to the target audience of the newspaper, and it has to be newsworthy. So it cannot be just you selling in Pampers and saying, hey, go and buy these Pampers. You need to speak about something that is of interest to the public and that the newspaper can look into to publish.
Spoken like a true PR practitioner. Sophie, is this something that you've had to grapple with over the years?
I grapple with this every day, even on Sunday, for that matter, where PR companies would send me WhatsApp, hey, this is happening, so and so, we want you to come and cover this. I look at it, and as a journalist, I check whether it's worth it in terms of doing a story. And I do a story, I don't do a PR. You'll get someone saying, hey, Baby Wine is coming to South Africa, he's receiving an award, blah, blah, blah. Oh, thank you. I'm now having these newsmakers. Right. For years I've been trying to get hold of him to try and understand why he is an activist in Uganda, taking into consideration what's happening in Uganda. And I do a proper story. And you look at the last program of African Perspective where we had Baby Wine as our guest. You must go and check on YouTube the hits there, because the presenter or the anchor did the research. And even though we got to know about his visit from the PR company, what happened was that we got a
Became a
good
news
story.
story.
So there's nothing wrong in PR companies flooding us with these things, but we have to sift through to check what can be a story and what is not a story, and don't shy away to ask those hard questions, doing just a story. Sometimes you find a situation where the newsmaker then goes back to the PR, but why did you say so famous? Look now, yes, ask me
Is there
this.
a danger, though, that young journalists, inexperienced journalists, can get sucked into this PR vortex, and before they realize what's happened, they're actually doing PR?
If they don't have leadership in their respective newsrooms, that will happen. But every newsroom must have senior seasoned editors who can be able to guide young upcoming journalists. In the same way, it didn't happen overnight to us to have experience. We had to learn from senior people. I mean, your Matatas, your Tate Jotlolo, when we arrive, your Anki Kroch, you know, we had to learn. So we, or senior leaders in the newsroom, must do the same, help young journalists where possible, and they will be okay. It doesn't mean they can't learn. Yes, they will learn. They will be mature. They will understand this is not a story. This is a story.
All right, so what about the state of the media in South Africa? When your gut feeling as someone who's kind of engaging with us all the time, and we look back at some of the challenges that we've had, and fights, and SANEF has had to step in and step out sometimes. What's your take on the state of media in South Africa in this past year?
I think firstly, you have to admire the courage of journalists in South Africa. Sitting here, sometimes I see some of the stories that you cover, some of the stories that Sophie covers, and you just look at the amount of courage that it would take you to do a story, sometimes against your own bosses. And that is the kind of courage that we have to appreciate. Journalists shedding light on things that other people wouldn't want to shed a light on. They want it to be kept in the dark, and keeping the public informed about things that could put their personal safety and perhaps even their careers at jeopardy. So I think in that instance, South Africa is moving in the right direction. I think now we need to elevate our conversation. I mean, look at the simple example of one of the top most Googled topics over the past 10 years, load shedding. It's actually number one. Wow. And we're not having a conversation around hydraulic power, around solar power. A lot of people would be shocked that just the sun, when it hits 1 square kilometer of the earth, that energy is as much as an atomic bomb. Wow. And if you look at hydraulic power, Africa has 90% of the global reserves of hydraulic power, but we're not using it. And we haven't seen a simple example of somebody saying, well, we've got this energy crisis, we've got a huge demand for energy. How about we do a campaign where everybody would put solar energy on their geyser? I mean, how far would that take us in terms of reducing the demand of electricity? And we're not having those conversations. And I think that we need to start to elevate the conversation a bit higher, have more representation in the townships and in the rural areas, so that we can have a more duplicity of thoughts coming in.
And resources always a big issue there. But Sophie, you've been at this game a long time, so you've been able to see over time the trends. And I just wonder, when you look at 2019, I mean, we're having SANEF inquiries into journalism. Is that an indicator that things may not be as well as they should be compared to previous years? Or
I think it's the industry and the sector maturing. We were in a honeymoon period for a long time. You know, during pre-1994, every journalist, every newsroom was expected to be an activist, because the situation there was fighting a particular system. Whether you are a journalist or a doctor, you couldn't stand by and be neutral in that situation, because it had to do with everything, you know, injustices everywhere. But post-1994, after democracy, sometimes we are struggling to move to the current, to understand that yes, we can still be activists as journalists for a particular cause, but also must remember that we must be objective, impartial, and independent at all times. But as we do that, you do it in a principled manner. And because it is almost, we are almost in our own transition. So these things will happen. Two, institutional memory is being eroded because many senior editors have resigned, have retired. Now you have young people who are grappling with all challenges and all pressures of society. And I think it was a good thing for SANEF to say, we've made mistakes along the way. Let's retrace our steps. Let's try to correct. Whether that's what's going to happen, I don't know. But as human beings, we are not perfect. We are fallible. We'll make mistakes. What is important is to correct our mistakes. And I think if the sector is engaging in a process to correct its mistakes, I don't have a problem.
All right. So a question for both of you. As mainstream media, inverted commas, do you think that we are still trusted? I mean, there's a lot of noise that's coming through social media and other online platforms. And I just wonder, as we compete with these new medias, do people still trust mainstream media, especially given some of the things that have played out this year?
The trust issue is a very interesting topic, and some people would like to simplify it and keep it easy and just say, if you look at some of these barometers, South Africa has a 40% media trust. It has 58% business and 60% NGO trust. But you have to look at it a bit differently. If you report about me in the Sunday Times and say I'm the CEO of Ditsecho Media, they would trust that that is true, but they may not trust the agenda behind the story. So it depends on what exactly is the media reporting on that they would trust what you're saying. And I think what journalists need to look at is what is in the public's interest. What is the context of South Africa? What is the history? What is the economic structure? And where do we need to go in order to fix the past injustices? And I think that is where we are not going in the right direction. I don't think the structure of the economy is understood that well. What environment is necessary for businesses to grow? Basic things like energy and infrastructure, very important. But also, you'll see conversations, for an example, on social media. Someone will say, we're supplying Zimbabwe with this amount of energy and electricity while we don't have electricity. Well, one of the reasons we don't have is because we have a huge demand of electricity. And our neighboring countries, if they're not run well, their citizens would want to come and live here, which increases demand. So if you take your electricity away from Zimbabwe, then you're going to have more people coming to South Africa.
And also the way the grid is set up, actually, you can't just switch off that line because that actually affects the
No, but also it's even more than that. I spoke to the CEO of the regulator in Zambia at some point in time, I think 3 months ago. We were talking about electricity and how they're getting electricity from South Africa. In other words, how SADC is working together to share the electricity. And I realized then that he said the reason they want us to continue to buy, it's because we buy, we pay. Yes, sometimes there are those who default, but they will later pay. But in our situation, we have a situation where Eskom is saying South Africans are not paying, making an example of Soweto. So I'm saying they are making money with these neighboring countries also. Eskom is benefiting. That's why it's so difficult to let it go at times, because they know that at least we're getting something, even though it's not, sometimes we have to push them to pay us, but we're getting something. Here at home, we have a challenge where people don't pay. In Everton, as we speak, there's a street there. Electricity challenges have been there for almost 7 months. No pylon. Eskom is refusing to put a pylon there. They are saying people don't pay. So I'm saying there are stories that we really have to do and check what's happening within Eskom. And you speak to engineers in Eskom. I spoke to one this week. He says, what you're talking about, you journalists, you don't know the story. Come to us. Don't even speak to our managers. Speak to us, engineers on the ground. We'll tell you what's the problem.
We're running out of time a little bit, so I'm going to push us a little bit. And right now, though, one of our regular features is when we go back into our news archives and we take you back to the 16th of December, 1995. And this was when the Day of Reconciliation was celebrated as a public holiday in South Africa for the very first time. The Day of Reconciliation's purpose is to commemorate the end of apartheid and promote national unity. Let's see how we covered that important story back then.
President Nelson Mandela was treated like royalty today when he visited Vredendal in the Northwestern Cape. He joined the people in celebrating the Government of National Unity's first Reconciliation Day.
It was President Mandela's first official visit to the Northwest Coast. First stop was a banquet given in his honor. Addressing the audience made up mostly of community leaders, Mr. Mandela said in the past the 16th of December had stood as a symbol of bitter division. He urged the people of the Northwest Coast to put that terrible history behind them and to work together for the future of their region and the entire nation.
And for me to be here is a fulfillment of a dream. I do hope that the fact that I'm here will convey a very important message to the people in this place, that the government which I lead cares for all our people.
Mr. Mandela later spoke at a rally attended by thousands of people from as far afield as Bitterfontein, Rietpoort and Doringbaai. President Mandela said he'd been wanting to visit the Northwest Coast for quite some time now. He said he'd now been forced to make the trip to thank the people of this region for their overwhelming support during the November 1 election. Many people said they'd come to the rally just to catch a glimpse of the president.
Al die tyd wou ek baie graag van president Mandela van naby sien. Hy lyk baie jonger as hy mens gewoon om die koerant te sien.
Dis die beste ding nog wat met wat in die Noordweskus kon gebeur het. Daar was nou nooit so iets groot in 'n streek nie.
The president returned the compliment, saying it was an honor for him to have celebrated Reconciliation Day at Vredendal, the Valley of Peace. Renee Skibi on the Northwest Coast for SABC TV News.
So that was the Day of Reconciliation in 1995. There's a whole generation of young people who missed all of that because they weren't even born. And that's part of the reason why we always go back into our archives every week, just to show some of the stories that we reported back in the day. Well, coming to the present day, the EFF the day 3 of the elective conference is currently underway. Let's cross now to Nasrec and speak to our reporter Natasha Piri, who's been there covering the story for us. Natasha, thanks so much for joining us. This is day 3 now. We now know our leadership, but the media storm continues, I guess, to be talked about.
Definitely, Peter. A very good morning to you, and of course to our SABC viewers. Indeed, today marks day 3 of the National People's Assembly Conference, and of course, Peter, we are nearing the end of the conference. As you know, that conference will actually, conclude tomorrow, Peter. And of course, just to remind our viewers there of the leadership, it comes as no surprise that Julius Malema keeps his position as party leader, of course, followed there by Deputy President Floyd Shibambu. That's also no surprise. But of course, just to usher in new members and also tell you about the other 4 candidates, or rather leaders who've actually made it to that top position. We've got the chairperson, Veronica Mente. We've got the SG, Marshall Dlamini. Of course, Marshall has got a quite interesting history as well. I mean, this is a person who's played a very fundamental role within the EFF. He's helped the EFF's electorate grow within the province of KwaZulu-Natal, and it also comes as no surprise that he is now the Secretary General of the party. We've also got the likes of Poppy Mailola. I hope I pronounced that well. And of course, Poppy is now the Deputy Secretary General. And of course, we've got the TG Ompile Mautwe. I also hope I pronounced that well, of course. So, I mean, this leadership also represents 50-50. You've got a gender balance there. 50% of the leaders are, females. And of course, this also speaks to the EFF's discussion document on gender parity. But Peter, you also speak about, a pertinent issue. Yesterday, part of the proceedings were actually overshadowed by the whole issue of media freedom. We saw there after the CIC of the party had actually lambasted the media, telling South African media that they are in denial if they don't think they're actually captured. And soon after that, we saw ENCA withdrawing out of the proceedings. Of course, this is something that the EFF is unapologetic about, saying that listen, if they want to withdraw, it's fine. They actually accept that, as a party. But also just, notwithstanding that, I think also the political reports actually fell through, the whole media storm that was actually, around the convention. Of course, today is a crucial day because members of the Central Command team will be also elected. And I mean, Julius Malema actually spoke to that point, and he had said that members of the CCT, or members rather of the EFF who are in leadership, should not be power hungry. He had said that there is some sort of phenomenon, I beg your pardon, where it seems as if some leaders within the EFF are more loyal to their positions and that as opposed to that of the party. So it'll be interesting to see which members of the CCT will be elected. But of course, we do promise as the SABC to give you rolling coverage throughout the day. Peter.
Natasha, thanks very much indeed, and we'll be, as you say, crossing to you again for day 3. We now know the leadership, and we'll be listening with a keen ear what will be coming out of conference today. All right, let's get back into the studio, and on social media at the beginning, Sophie, we started by seeing what was trending. Dr. Ndlozi was the number 3 trend, if I remember, and a lot of people surprised that he hasn't been elevated to a top 6 position.
Well, if you have observed Ndlozi, and also if you know the background in terms of him being an activist and his childhood, he's from the Val Triangle. He was involved in many things. He has been a child who was very ambitious from day one in terms of being an academic. Therefore, it is for that reason, in between the hectic work of the EFF, he did find time to study and do his PhD. But at some point in time, when I was talking to him earlier this year, just before elections, he said he would still want to pursue his first love, which is looking at academic perspective, and him saying he would even want to take time to go and write 2 books, and he was even contemplating going to Cuba to write these 2 books there, because he feels in Cuba he's not going to be distracted. And I think for me, he is not ambitious or hungry for power to be in the top 6. He is fine where he is within the space, but he still wants to pursue his first love, which is education. Yes,
and
education.
He's still very
he was
young,
even thinking of building a school in Val Triangle. Wow. So I think in between politics and education, his real love is education.
All right, okay, let's take a look at the front pages of the newspapers. Interesting headlines, and both involving SOEs. Sunday Times, Ace Makashule saying it's not just Zuma.
Yeah, I think SOEs have had challenges for quite some time. So it wouldn't be an individual who is responsible for the SOEs in general. But I think what is responsible is a culture. So we need a culture in South Africa of meritocracy, where we have an open advertisement for these positions, and we take the best people for the jobs, and taking into consideration black economic empowerment and so on and so forth. Gender equality is very important. So I think what we have done is we haven't been hiring our best talent onto those boards. And that's why the organizations are not working. It's that simple. And I think the culture needs to shift, where we take our best talent into all of these boards, into the leadership, and then we start to run them like well-oiled machines.
In 30 seconds, your thoughts?
I mean, taking leave from what the ANC Deputy President said at the SACP, which was very, very profound. People were even angry when I said, here is the Deputy President of the ANC admitting that the deployment committee at times did make mistakes. Even him saying at times he would argue with people, but finally, of course, the democratic centralism and the majority voice stands. It is the question of deploying right people at the right places, and as they get in there, stop thinking that a politician will be there for life, and don't allow a politician to make you do things that are wrong. Be principled. Rather, walk away, because here you have a situation where you have very skilled, competent, learned Africans who are being deployed, but the political pressure behind the scenes,
it's getting them
heavy. So at times, these are lessons. Some have been victims. The coming leadership or the coming group shouldn't commit the same mistakes.
We've run out of time, but the one word I'm going to remember today is, and take into the New Year's, #principle as key.
Consistency.
Yes. Thank you both for joining us and being our guest editors. So it was fabulous talking to you.
Thank you.
And to you at home, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Have a great day, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.